a way of determining which of all the different diet theories works best in an individual. So if you were asking me for the sort of thumbnail sketch of the whole thing, or the executive summary, it would be that blood type carries enough information for you to determine which of all the competing diet theories is going to be the one that's best suited for you.
Highly individual program. And so let's just, I interrupted you, but we were talking about what are the distinguishing factors?
Characteristics, sure.
O, A, B.
Well, let's start with the most common one. Now, this varies from country to country, and certain ethnic groups have different blood type distributions as well. But it's generally assumed that in most populations, type O is the most common blood type. In America, it's about 40 to 45% of the population right there. Type O is probably an immunologically very simple blood type. It has an inherent tendency immunologically to be prone more towards inflammation. It's a blood type that does well on high protein type diets as long as the protein sources are very clean. So for instance, with this blood type, deep ocean fish that's rich in omega fatty acids, grass-fed free-range lean meats, New Zealand lamb, organic free-range poultry, these kind of foods are a great source of nutrition because this particular blood type over the years has evolved the capabilities of breaking down animal protein far better than the other blood types. Studies have shown, for instance, since the 1950s that people who are group O have higher levels of stomach acid. They have enzymes in their intestinal tract that break down fat that the other blood types don't possess. This enzyme in the intestinal tract also breaks down cholesterol in the diet. Interesting that this same enzyme is responsible for absorbing calcium. And in type O, it's not activated unless there's a small amount of fat in the diet. So a type O on a low-fat diet is going to have complications with regard to their calcium absorption. So here's one part of the spectrum. You know, here's 44% of the population that are going to do fairly well on what people call the sort of low-carb type diet, low-carb, high-protein type diet. Almost 1 out of 2 people will do fairly well on that.
But I knew someone who's a vegetarian. Can that be done? You don't recommend it, do you?
It really depends on what level of pathology the person's experiencing. I have occasionally had people who've run up to me and proclaimed very vociferously that they're type O vegetarians, and they never felt better, and you know, what does that do to your theory? And it really ultimately doesn't do very much because health can be sustained in a lot of different levels at a lot of different ways. So ultimately having a healthy vegetarian who's type O, you know, it's possible. The difficulty arises if the person's so wed to that belief system that if they all of a sudden were not working well, and if they all of a sudden did have some sickness, would they still stick with that? And the perfect example of that is the guy who helps me with my website, who was a 3-time vegetarian trivia champion for the United States and head of the Houston Vegetarian Society, who had an autoimmune disease called pemphigus, where his immune system was actually attacking his skin. Normally it's a very lethal disease and people often die. And he kept trying to be a better and better vegetarian, and he got sicker and sicker. Until a couple of years ago, he just happened on the first book I wrote, Eat Right, and he looked at it and he said, well, I've tried everything else, I suppose I should try this. And his pemphigus went into remission. And he had an interesting phrase at one point, which he told me, which was that he was not prepared to die for the cause. So if indeed you are a vegetarian type O, you can probably say that if you feel well, maybe you can persist a while longer. But if something unravels, how willing are you going to be to maybe change your belief system a little bit?
So then the A's are really the vegetarians. They need to be more vegetarian.
They do better on a sort of low octane diet. So in essence, if you look at type A, they do better on things like, they can do well on some types of seafood, but their proteins should be predominantly plant-based. So for instance, in this blood type, you're really trying to emphasize beans and legumes, complex carbohydrates. Type A has a very consistent association with higher rates of certain cancers. So in essence, if you're looking at the type A diet, you're also looking at, probably to the best of our knowledge, what constitutes maybe the best anti-cancer diet as well. Soy products in type A actually have some pretty good results in terms of being able to lower their rates of cancer. And in and of itself, the whole soy thing is kind of one of those wonderful paradoxes that we find in medicine, which is, you know, the New York Times will say one day soy is good, and then the next day Newsweek magazine says there's a study that shows that soy is bad. Soy's, you know, the miracle thing that's going to solve everybody's problems, and now soy's going to attack your thyroid. So how do people sort through the whole competing thing with the media, information that's coming out with regard to studies and things?
Also,
Increasingly, we're going to look at genetics.
right, right. And there's also the threat of the high GMO content in the soy products, the genetically modified organisms. So that's the A. How about the B?
Well, we can talk about Bs and ABs as kind of in the same tone.
Okay.
They both carry a B antigen, which tends to make them more susceptible to certain types of infections that are unique to them. Because a lot of organisms actually get into our body by mimicking our blood type. So for instance, if you're a very smart little bacteria, you'll put on a coat of blood type B if you want to get into a person who's type B blood. And so A, B and B tend to share a lot of the same disease susceptibilities, but at the same time you're winding up in a situation with that blood type is having a kind of a set of its own peculiarities. They're more omnivorous than type A and type O in the sense that they do well with a combination of both animal and vegetable kingdoms, but because they carry this unique different molecule, this B antigen, they have very idiosyncratic relationships with foods. For instance, the classic example is that, for instance, turkey, which would be fine with a person who was B or AB, but chicken would be problematic. And most people would tend to think, you know, that you're going to have pretty much the same reaction to one as you do to the other. But it turns out that chicken has a variety of proteins that like to attach to the B antigen. And so consequently, there's a reaction there that's predictable by blood type, and turkey doesn't possess these chemicals. And of course, since it would only react with the B blood type, it would be essentially of a different activity level than other blood types that didn't have it.